to listen to Dr. Wollschlaeger. A little bit of information before he starts. He's a board-certified family physician in North Miami Beach, Florida, and has over 35 years in the medical field, maybe longer. He's continues to help patients at the Aventura Family Health Practice in Florida, but perhaps his greatest reward is inspiring others to believe against all odds, change is possible. Dr. Wollschlaeger's book, A German Life, chronicles his struggles while growing up in Germany during the 1950s in the shadow of his father, a Nazi officer, eventually converting to Judaism and becoming a medical officer in the Israeli Defense Force. This is what I found on your website. And I just found this very interesting, so I just want you to share it, and I know you're going to talk more about it. When my young son first asked me about his grandfather, I didn't know how to explain that while his own father was Jewish and an Israeli citizen who served in the army, on the other hand, his grandfather was a highly decorated World War II Nazi tank commander. So the secret came out and you started sharing your story. Despite denials from your family, he eventually learned the shocking truth about German history, his father, and the Holocaust. As a teenager, he was introduced to a group of Israelis visiting Germany and was invited to travel to Israel, where he learned more about Judaism and began pursuing his goal to convert. So by sharing his story, the shame and guilt was lifted off his shoulder.
She is so horrible.
You have to step out of the shadows by recognizing mistakes, learning from the past, and moving forward with lessons learned to change the world in a positive way. I found that very inspiring. The actions of hatred can be countered by speaking up and making decisions based on conviction. Against all odds, change is possible in a person, in a group, or even in a country, but it starts with individuals. And that's on Dr. Wollschlaeger's website, and all of the information that I was looking up before we asked him to join us on this. And a very, very important piece of this is when we actually decided we wanted to ask you to talk to us, we chose a date, not even thinking what date, what was working for us, what was working for you. And it just so happens to be that last week was the 76th commemoration of Yom HaShoah, which is the remembrance of the Holocaust. And next week, we're celebrating Yom HaZikaron. So it's interesting that we chose this week out of all weeks to have you speak to us. I know you've written other books. You can talk to us a bit about those other books you've written. And I want everyone just to know in the chat, because we are part of Naamat, we are asking for a suggested $18 donation. It's going to be in the chat who send that donation to. We are being recorded. And for anyone, in case you listen and you think, okay, you know what, my mother would love this and she couldn't join us, my kids would love this. So, and I'm hoping that people of all generations listen to what you have to say. Also, you have spoken about the Holocaust Museum, hdec.org, which is the Holocaust Education Center.
Yeah, I didn't.
So I went onto that website. So just sharing that information with everybody and asking them if they'd like to go onto that website and see the information there. So that's all I'm going to say for now, and we're going to turn it over to you. Everyone's going to mute themselves. I think Felicia has muted us, but make sure you are muted for the presentation. Thanks so much. Looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you very much. Now that you heard my story, we can go straight to question and answers, or? Okay, though I will try to make it fill the spaces in between what you told me, what you already told me. Well, first of all, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I think Zoom makes the communication much easier, but even though I would have liked personal one-to-one conversation, but we can't do it right now, so let's suffice with Zoom. My name is Bernd Wollschlaeger. I'm a medical doctor, born and raised in Germany. That's not how I introduce myself. And then there's some little tiny things in my past. We can talk about that too. That was my attitude for many years. But I had a son, or I have a son, I have 3 children. I think there's background noise. Anybody talking? I have 3 children, and they're all grown up. And one day, my son, Tal, he's now 32, he was about 14, 15 years old, asked me a very simple question, which is actually for most people not difficult to answer. He asked me, Dad, who is my grandfather? Well, there was a tiny problem, because on the one hand, yours truly, that means me, is Jewish and Israeli and served in a combat unit as a medical officer in the Israel Defense Forces. And on the other hand, my son is a nice Jewish boy born to a Jewish family and had to deal with the fact that his grandfather was a highly decorated World War II German tank commander and convinced Nazi until his death. So to convey that and to explain that and not to confuse a child, it's difficult, but I tried because I had to, and what I told him is approximately what I'm going to tell you with some variations that sneaked in over the course of time. First of all, every life begins with the time and place you were born in and born at. I was born May the 9th, 1958, 13 years and 1 day after the end of the Second World War. And I was born into a gorgeous city called Bamberg, B-A-M-B-E-R-G, or Bamberg, as we say in German. It's a Bavarian city nestled between Würzburg and Nuremberg. It's a 1,000-year-old city, untouched by any wars. Nothing had changed there. No war, including the Second World War, touched the city. And I grew up in the sense of history. I remember in elementary school, we got these little cards. We had to write down who built what church, what building, who lived where. The fact is that Bamberg was built on 7 hills like Rome, made it the Rome of the North, and the only pope buried outside Rome was buried there. So full of history, and we learned it from A to Z. But one thing I noticed, not because I was smarter, but because there was something funny. There were 15,000 American soldiers and family members living in a city of 75,000, and they were speaking a different language. We knew as children that a war happened, something big happened, but we didn't understand what it was, except that in a war, people win and people lose. And the fact that there are 15,000 American soldiers and family members were living in the city meant we didn't win that one. That was all what I understood. I understood that we are close to the Iron Curtain, about 20 miles, that this was the dividing line between freedom and dictatorship. And we had literally witnessed maneuvers, tank maneuvers, airplanes flying in low formation every single day, and could even identify what planes were flying above in the sky. So one thing I also knew, that the war shaped our family or changed our family, because when I asked my father and my mother about my grandparents, I was told they're gone because of the war. And so the war changed everything. The family is interrupted and disrupted, but nobody wants to talk about it. So that was the confusing part. But slowly but surely, my parents started to open up and told me, because I nudged them over and over again, about that time called the Second World War and the time that has led to the Second World War. And when my father started talking on long walks that we had on Sunday afternoons in the forest, he taught me how to fish, how to handle a rifle, how to shoot. I had a very close relationship with him. And on these long walks, he told me a story over and over again, that he was the youngest tank commander in a German elite tank unit under the command of General Guderian, the father of the German Blitzkrieg. And this elite unit, and every border that Germany, of course, tore down, September 1st, 1939, the attack on Poland, my father's tanks were the first to roll in. Next year, the attack on France, Holland, Belgium, my father's tanks were the first to roll in. And then, of course, the major invasion of the former Soviet Union in July 1941, my father's tanks were the first to roll in, not only deep into Russia or in the former Soviet Union, but also conquering a town on the way towards Moscow called Orel. And for that accomplishment, major accomplishment, my father was awarded the Knight's Cross by a man whom he still adoringly referred to as his Führer, Adolf Hitler. Now, I had no idea who Adolf Hitler was. I never heard about it. I had no idea what that meant, but my father was a hero, obviously. And the message that my father was a hero was reinforced by his old war buddies, who came to visit our house once, twice a year to celebrate the good old times, the war. And my father was celebrated every time during these meetings as Arturo, our hero. And I remember these hard-drinking, strong men, very influenced me a lot, and that they called my father a hero. He must have been a hero, the knight in shining armor. That's all what I knew. On the other hand, my mother told me a completely different story, the story of horror, of loss, of catastrophe. She was born in Czechoslovakia, actually in the Sudetenland, as an ethnic German, which is now Czechoslovakia, on the border region between West Germany and the eastern part of Czechoslovakia. And about 1.5, 1.8 million Sudetendeutsche, ethnic Germans, lived there for hundreds of years. My maternal grandfather was a wealthy merchant. They could afford to live in a beautiful villa in the outskirts of Karlsbad, and everything gone because of the war. The only thing she had when she fled, my mother had a gun in her hand that my father gave her with the instruction to shoot herself when the Russians come. And her grandparents, my grandparents perished during the flight. So on the one hand, glory, on the one hand, other hand, catastrophe. But that was not all. We were living in a massive building, and we rented an apartment in a massive building located in downtown Bamberg, which is still standing, patrician style, Bauhaus structure. It's still standing in the pride that it was built. And we rented an apartment downstairs, and upstairs the landlady lived, and my mother told me, do not talk to her unless spoken to. She's a noble woman, a countess, or in German, a Gräfin. So I didn't speak to her unless spoken to. And in the hallway, right next to the wooden stairway leading upstairs to the countess's apartment, was a painting mounted on the wall depicting an officer in uniform with the officer's cap, the officer's insignia on the shoulder, and the knight's cross around his neck. And initially I thought that was my father, but then I saw pictures of my father in uniform, and the facial expression, they were different. So it's a different person with a similar rank than my father. When I asked my father who this man was, or who this picture depicted, he told me that he was a traitor and I should never ask him anything about him anymore. Well, the man who is a traitor, that kind of confused me, because on the one hand, how can two men who looked alike, on one hand, my father is good and this man is bad? Simple question of a child. Well, I found out that this was a picture or painting of a man called Count Klaus von Stauffenberg, the German colonel who was leading the assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler on the 25th of July, 1944. His widow, Nina von Stauffenberg, lived upstairs. And I heard and learned about him not from my father, but because he wouldn't talk about it, but from the lady upstairs. I was not supposed to go up there, but on Sunday afternoons, after lunch, when my parents were tired and slept, I sneaked upstairs, because not only because of her to know more about it, because she had grandchildren. And the grandchildren came on Sundays, and they had cool toys that I couldn't have. And we played together. And I remember this huge apartment. There was literally wall-to-wall pictures of her husband, no space left, depicting a happy couple, she with him with her, in scenes where that cannot be a bad man. That must have been a very good man who cared for his family. So this contrast, I could never get out of my mind. In school, I was about, I would say 11, 12. We started to talk about that war in the following way, because we had to bridge the gap, and our teacher had to do something in order to bridge the gap between 1933 and 1945. And what we learned, in our school at least, was the following. Hitler rose to power in a democratically elected parliament in last election were in November 1932. He rose to power in the 30th of January 1933 by being appointed by the then Chancellor Papen and the then President Hindenburg. And the first act what Hitler did as a democratically elected leader, though, is to deconstruct and completely destroy all forms of democracy. The Reichstag was attacked, and it was all staged, the parliament, and that Hitler used for propaganda purposes. Thousands of people disappeared in concentration camps because they were against the regime. The Nazis started the Second World War, 60, 70, 80 million people perished, among them 6 million Jews, as collateral damage of war, not as Holocaust. The term Holocaust was not used yet at that time. They were killed, 6 million, because there was a war. And then on the 8th of May, 1945, huff and puff, the war ended, Germany surrendered. and the Nazis were gone like the Huns invaded the country and disappeared. Well, that was, of course, a bunch of horse manure. I don't want it's a PG-rated event. I don't want to use the word that I truly want to use. And that was a lie. And Germany, in the time that I was living in, was in the process of change. The prime minister, the current prime minister from 1966 to 1969, the last prime minister that we had was tainted by the past. His name was Kiesinger. He was a former Nazi and was a member of the Nazi propaganda ministry. And in this time in Germany, in the time of change, the prime minister was elected in 1969 that changed everything. His name was Willy Brandt. Now, Willy Brandt was a socialist in 1933, had to belong to the Socialist Party, had to flee Germany to Norway. Norway was occupied, he fled to Sweden. And he returned to Germany in 1949 to reclaim his German citizenship and to then lead the new party, the Social Democratic Party, to victory in 1969, election victory. And when he was elected, the first thing that he did in December 1970, he traveled to Poland, Willy Brandt, the now Prime Minister, Chancellor, traveled to Poland, and in front of the Ghetto Memorial in Warsaw, he sank on his knees, bowed his head, and asked for forgiveness for what Germany did. Never, ever before did a German politician show so much devotion and shame and was willing to be criticized for that, but he had to do it. And I remember my father yelling and screaming when he saw the picture of the Chancellor kneeling in front of a memorial. My father was livid, red head, his face was red, and he was yelling and screaming, "Schau mal her, Bernd, look, Bernd, again a traitor." Now, I was confused because I was raised by my mother mostly in religious affairs. My father was a Protestant. My mother was a liberal, and he called himself an atheist. My mother was an Orthodox Catholic, and she sent me to Orthodox Catholic kindergarten, elementary school. I was an altar boy. She wanted me to become a priest. That didn't work out, obviously. And for me, being an Orthodox Catholic, for me, a man kneeling in front of a memorial, man or woman, was a sign of devotion, something positive. Why is my father so mad? And Germany gained, of course, with that experience in the world, the status that it is a country that is in change and wants to change. And one sign of change was the decision of the Olympic Committee to award Germany the Olympic Games Summer Games in August 1972. Because the last time Germany opened a game, hosted the games, was in 1936, Hitler's propaganda games in Berlin. This should be demonstrated to the world that this is a different Germany. And it was a different Germany. And when the games began, my father, I remember, bought our first TV, a black and white TV though. He invited friends over, and these friends were celebrating and drinking wine and eating cheese. It was a festive environment. And every time a team paraded into the stadium with their respective flags carrying it, and we could identify, every time these teams paraded into the stadium, everybody was clapping, hello, ho, ho, and the German team appeared. And then at that moment, a team appeared on the screen carrying a flag with a star inside, of course, the Israeli team. And at that moment, everybody felt silent. Nobody talked. And I found it weird. I said, that's strange. Why did the adults turn away from the screen? That's just another team. I had no idea what Israeli team meant. I had no idea what the flag meant. But I knew that this triggered a reaction. And the same team, Israeli team, that proudly paraded into the stadium, was 10 days later brutally attacked by a group of Palestinian terrorists, an elite unit of the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was supported by, which we know now, by the East German Security Service, the Stasi, logistics, and probably also with weapons, climbed the Olympic defense in the Olympic Village, attacked the Israelis in the Connolly Straße, it was called the location, brutally slaughtered 2 Israelis on the spot, and the remainder were taken hostage. And the German government, deeply shocked, embarrassed that Israeli Jews were slaughtered on German ground, dispatched highest ranking government ministers, including the Minister of Interior, to the Olympic Village, who negotiated personally face-to-face with the terrorist leader, Issa, and I'm sorry. And I think there's some background noise. Hello? Are you still there? Okay.
Can you make sure, everyone, that you're muted? Just make sure that you've muted yourself. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. And Issa negotiated with the Minister of Interior, and the Minister of Interior offered all members of the German cabinet to be taken hostage in lieu of the Israelis. Issa rejected it. He demanded that a German military Boeing 747 would take them to a military airport outside Cairo or Libya, I'm not quite sure, Tripoli, and that in a big worldwide affair, all live television, the Israelis should exchange 280 or 290 Arab prisoners with the Israeli hostages. Well, that never happened. I remember beat by beat what happened that night. At night, 2 helicopters took off from the Olympic Village. Each helicopter equally distributed the hostages and the terrorists. A security detail flew with a 3rd helicopter behind them. They landed behind closed gates of the military airport, Fürstenfeldbruck, next to Munich. And nobody, of course, could end in there. The only thing what we heard and saw were explosions. Suddenly explosions, the night sky lit for firefight, almost an intense firefight, almost lasting for an hour and a half. And then deafening silence. Something horrible must have happened. And it did. An American journalist, exhausted, turned to the camera and stated in one sentence, they're all gone. What happened is the German police opened fire and tried to liberate the hostages, which was a major mistake. The Israeli Mossad units on the ground, specifically Mossad Kidon, under the leadership of Tzvi Samir, the head of the Mossad, begged the Germans, do not attack. These are elite units. You cannot surrender them. These are elite soldiers. They're battle-hardened. Don't do it. Well, they did it. And in the ensuing firefight, the Issa, the terrorist commander, threw a hand grenade in one helicopter, and it of course, the fireball exploded fire, and everybody perished in the helicopter. The second helicopter, he sprayed with machine gun fire, and everybody died. The next day, that picture in the newspaper that changed my life and made me the man I am today. 2 helicopters on the tarmac, one burned out with the charred remains of the Israelis visible, the other helicopter with the bodies of the Israelis slumped over the seats, covered with blood-stained linen, and a huge headline, Jews killed in Germany again. Well, I speak perfect German. I did speak perfect German then too, but I didn't understand the part again. What does it mean again? And I asked my father when I came home and said, Father, what happened? In the newspaper, they say again. My father, yelling and screaming, told me, not again with them, the Jews. Look what they do with us. Every time they're involved with something that happened in Germany, they stain our national image, they destroy our national image. They're always guilty for all the mess that they're bringing in. I had it with them. So he was angry that terrorists were shooting and killing Jews in Germany. So the victims as perpetrators, the perpetrators as victims. But in school, we started to talk for the first time about the importance to understand what it means that Jews are killed in Germany again. And in absence of any Holocaust curriculum yet, our teachers told us their respective life stories. Some of them cried openly, weeping. And for the first time, I heard the terms Auschwitz, Majdanek, Treblinka, the final solution, the murder of 6 million, not a collateral damage of war, the murder of 6 million in the name of a democratically elected government, in the name of Germany, in the name of my people, in the name of me. I'm responsible for that too. I'm touched by this violence. I'm a German. I was shocked. I couldn't understand it. And I came home. I remember my father asked me, what did you learn in school? He always asked me that. He went over schoolwork. He wanted me to learn and study hard, specifically sciences. And I told him, look, Father, I could never call him Dad. I only could him call Vater, Father. I had to keep my distance. I couldn't touch him. I couldn't hug him. I couldn't kiss him. He was the authority. He said, Father, what does it mean, Holocaust? And he looked at me. What it means, it's a lie. You teachers are communists. It never happened. Don't listen to them. Listen to me. So I was caught between the rock and a hard place. On the one hand, my father told me that it's a lie, and I respected and feared my father. On the other hand, my teachers I respected, and they didn't lie either. So I'm confused. What happened? And I started to read whatever I could about that past, which a lot was already published in English, German, French. And the more I read, the more the sinking feeling, my father must have known that, the hero. Maybe he can tell me something, shed light on it. So I tried to ask him questions. The problem was my father wouldn't talk about anything. And the fact that he was a raging alcoholic made it easier for me to get the information out. as a child of a raging alcoholic father, I knew that there were 3 phases during the day. Phase 1, he was looking for a drink in the late afternoon, was restless, irritable, and discontent. In phase 3, late in the evening, he was drunk. There was nothing to get out of it. But between the phase 2, the twilight zone, I call it the Schicker zone. Nowadays, it's a joke, but he was loosening up. He was talking. I could manipulate him, get money out of him, and I could ask him questions. And the answers came out also in phases. Phase 1, I paraphrase it. Look, Bernd, whatever allegedly happened in the East, allegedly, so already admitted there was something, tiny little thing happened. We didn't do it, the military, the army, the Wehrmacht. It was all the SS. Well, that was a lie. I knew that already from the lady upstairs, Nina von Stauffenberg. Over the years, I spoke with her, and she was interested. She knew me, but she wanted me to know. And she told me, look, that's not what your father tells you, correct? Your father wants you to believe something else. Let me tell you what really happened. And I knew that my father was lying. I actually, 20 years after his death, after the opening of the archives in the East, the military archives in the East, with the fall of the former Soviet Union in the former East Germany, found a picture, actually a military historian found a picture of my father. He was at that time, he was a lieutenant colonel, sitting next to Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, in a meeting in the summer of 1942 in Russia, when a battle-hardened and decorated German Wehrmacht officer talked to the head of the beast, the monster. It was not about tank tactics. It was about securing territory in the East by the Wehrmacht. The SS went in for mass murder. So he lied. I also found out that was just 5 years ago when I was in Bamberg, that a military historian with whom I was working with for years brought me a metal attaché suitcase to a meeting. And I said, you need to know that before you start speaking here. And I said, what is it? What is it? And he looked me in the eyes and said, you want to open the suitcase? I trusted him, it's not a bomb. So I opened the suitcase, and inside were ripped Torah scrolls. He said, what does it mean? He said, when your father's units ripped into Jewish villages, they killed everybody. And then they tore down the synagogue, ripped out the Torah scrolls, soaked them in water, cut them in pieces, and used them as insulation material for the German tanks in the cold Russian winter. It worked well. So my father was not only knew about it, he was involved in it. And in the second phase of encounters, I asked him questions directly over the murder of children. He said, children were not murdered. They were partisans. They didn't wear a uniform, but they had weapons, and they were pursuing us. And according to the Geneva Convention, you could kill anybody who carries a weapon who had no uniform. Well, that's interesting, Father. You told me that 1.2 million children were fighting the mightiest army in the world. That's horseshit. That's not true, because I learned that they were gassed in Auschwitz, the bodies burned, the ashes scattered on the killing fields there. Well, that's all propaganda. And the last phase, and the last question that we had, an answer that he gave me was about a drunk. He told me, Bernd, you're weak. Your whole generation is weak. You don't trust in yourself. You just follow the propaganda. You're weak, because what we did, we killed all those vermin. That were not humans. These were Dreck, Schmutz. And if we wouldn't have done it, somebody else would do it, and the world should give us a Nobel Prize for human resources and for killing this nasty stuff. And that was the last straw that broke the camel's back of trust. I didn't talk to my father anymore. I didn't look up to him, I looked down to him. For me, he was a murderer, a common murderer. But it didn't solve the problem, because I needed to know how this relates to me. And I spoke with my teacher, a former Jesuit priest. He was our ethic and religion teacher. And he said, Bernd, I had similar, in a different generation that I belonged to, but I had similar issues to get in terms of that, to be a German and to make amends. And I told him, ask him, what do you mean amends? Amends to them who were harmed. I said, what do you mean, the Jews? I never met a Jew. How can I make amends? I said, well, I can arrange that. And so he told me he belongs to the progressive part of the Jesuit priest, the Catholic movement. As a Jesuit priest, he invited once a year a group of Israelis, Jews and Arabs alike, to Germany in the name of the organization called Neve Shalom. And in being in Germany, Jews and Arabs, they met from Israel. We meet also with Germans, and you could be our German representative. And so for the first time in the age of 18, I met Jews and I met Arabs. I met people that were not different to me. We were alike. What music we like, what food we like, music. And I liked the Israeli girls a lot. There's nothing wrong with that. So I was not only spiritually driven in my quest for being a Jew, That came later. And the girl that I liked very much, she said, look, Tacheles, and that's the way Israeli girls are. Tacheles, if you like me, you have to see my parents. You have to come to Israel. And I was a big Schwitzer. I said, absolutely, I do that. There was just a tiny problem, tiny little problem. I had no passport and I had no money. So when she left, I was motivated by going to see her again. I did some summer jobs, got some money together, I got my passport, and I traveled to Israel in the way I do not recommend. I took a train, a hitchhike to Munich. From Munich, I took a train across the Alps to the Adriatic port, the Italian port city in the Adriatic Sea called Ancona. From there, I slept on deck of a ferry, not a cruise ship. And we stopped in Piraeus in Greece for reprovisions, and I sent a telex, that was before Google Schmuggle and all that stuff, informing her that I will arrive in that and that day and that and that time in Haifa. And I remember the morning we slowly approached Haifa. I saw in the early morning sun the Carmel Mountains almost rising from the sea. And we docked in the harbor, and I suddenly felt panic and fear. What will happen if somebody recognizes my name? Maybe my father did something to a family that I inadvertently be in touch with. I had no idea. But all was wiped away, and all doubt was wiped away when I saw her standing in the customs area. She embraced me and said, look, Bernd, let's go to my home. And she took me with the community taxi, it was called Chaverot at that time, up the mountain to Neve Sha'anan, which was at that time a working class neighborhood. Tiny little houses, two of them above each other. And her father and mother were standing outside. In the moment that the taxi stopped, they took my bag, chit-chatting with me in Yiddish. I had no idea what they were talking about. Took my rucksack, my bag, holding my arms, walking me into the house. And I didn't know what they want. I didn't know who they are until my girlfriend explained it to me. And these are her parents. They set me up in a room, a one-bedroom apartment. They squeezed themselves into one little room and gave me an entire living room as a guest. And sat me down, said, you must be hungry, and fed me hummus, trina, falafel, things that I never ate in my life before. And chit-chatting. And suddenly her father turned towards me, knowing that he has to say that I wouldn't understand otherwise, and asked me, do you want to speak German? And I replied, sure, I speak German. And he looked me in my eyes, turned the forearm towards me, rolled up the sleeve, and pointed on the number tattooed. Ich war in den Lagern. Ich spreche Deutsch, weil ich in den Lagern war. I speak German because I was in the camps. And I wanted to sink in the ground. Here, for the first time, a German in a Jewish household in Israel, in a home of Holocaust survivors. I didn't know what to say. He looked at me and said, look, Bernd, nothing against you. I stayed in Germany from 1945 to 1948 in a displaced person camp in Bavaria, a DP camp, and I had to learn that and realize that not all Germans are monsters. But I want to know, do they teach you that? And I replied, no, probably not enough. And 2 days later, he took me to Yad Vashem in the Holocaust Memorial in Yerushalayim. And he took my hand, squeezed it hard, and walked me through the entire exhibit, the old exhibit, literally by exhibit to exhibit, and explained me in details what happened. And in the last exhibit, I physically and emotionally collapsed. I could not take it anymore. Not because he tortured me, because I was overwhelmed by so much hatred, so much murder. Why these nice people who hosted me were murdered for what? And I asked myself, how can they be so positive looking towards the future, hosting a son of a Nazi in their home, rebuilding their personal life, their professional life, and an old country anew? I want to learn more about them. I want to learn what it means to be a Jew. On the way back to Germany, I pondered the question, how can I find out about Jews? Well, there was a little tiny problem. Germany at that time, West Germany at least, there were about 65 to 75 million citizens, and among them about 25,000 Jews. And they were hermetically sealed off, in a sense, in the communities in Frankfurt, Munich, Berlin, and you couldn't get in. There was a time of terrorism. The Baader Meinhof, the Red Army faction, German anti-Israel German terrorist groups, they were called the Red Army, who trained with the Palestinian terror groups in the Middle East to kill Jews. Then, of course, the Palestinian terror groups. So you couldn't get into these communities. But I was lucky in my hometown, Bamberg. I heard that there was an Israelitische Kultusgemeinde, an Israelite community, not even Jewish community called. I thought it was a museum. And their entrance was accessible in the main building in downtown from the back in a very, very tiny little area behind the building. And I knocked at the door, and an old man opened the door. He was pale, maximum 5'4", and he looked at me and said, "Was machst du hier? What do you want?" And I must have babbled something because he felt comfortable to open the door and said, "Come in." And I walked through a dark corridor, only lit by a light in the corner, a red light, and the walls covered with granite plates. And on the granite plates were names engraved in golden letters. And I asked him, "What does it mean?" He said, "You don't know that? These are the names of all Bamberg Jews who perished in the Holocaust, never came back, 1,500. And the light in the corner, it's the Ner Tamid, the eternal light. Come with me." And he walked me to his office, which was a tiny little office, no air conditioning. It was summer, late summer, very hot. No air conditioning, curtains drawn, windows closed. It was too hot even for him, and he took off his jacket, and he had a white short-sleeved shirt, and the number tattooed on his forearm stood up, and I stared at it. Every time I see the number, I stare. And he said, this is Auschwitz. My name is Itzhak Rosenberg. I'm the chair of the Jewish community. I survived Auschwitz. What do you want? Tough as a nail. And I told him my story and said, "That's a very sad story. Really hard to deal with it. What can I help you with that? Can you teach me about Judaism?" But look, young man, I was 14 when I survived. I know nothing about my own religion, a little bit here, a little bit there, but I can give you books, you can learn about it. I know that you bring it back. I said, "Look, Mr. Rosenberg, I read everything about it. I want to learn more." I said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to help you." Helping. And in return, you can teach me. So then you have to make a geschäft. If I teach you, you have to be my Shabbos goy. Well, Shabbos goy, Shabbos shmor, I had no idea what it meant. But I said, "Okay, I do it." I said, "You know what you have to do? If you don't, come on Friday at 6 o'clock, I'll show you." I came on Friday at 6 o'clock, he came at like 7:30. I said, "Was machst du?" I said, "I wait for you since 6. Nah, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock. You have to unlearn your Germanness." And he smiled. He had this wicked humor. He walked me into the community and said, "You have to make the coffee, the tea, prepare everything, because a Jew," that's the first lesson, an Orthodox Jew cannot do these chores during Shabbat. And one important thing, when the members of the community will come, they won't like you because you're intruding in the only world that they have for themselves, and they don't like goyim. And he was right. The member of the Jewish community came in and they were hickory and pickery. "Was macht der Goy dort?" It's like these alte kackers, don't listen to them, just do what I tell you to do. And so every Friday, every Saturday, week by week, month by month, holiday by holiday, year by year, I was working as a Shabbos scholar. And the closer I came to this family of choice, the more I absorbed the liturgy, the mannerism, the language, the more I distanced myself from my family of origin. And it came to, of course, two blow-ups. And one major blow-up was when Christmas, was 5 years after my spiritual journey, when Christmas fell on a Friday night. And Christmas in an Orthodox Catholic household was a huge, big thing. I remember we had to go with our mother to the Mass, the Holy Mass, came back. My mother prepared lentil soup and carp as a symbolic food for Friday, for Christmas. We were waiting for our father to ring the bell. We opened, and my mother opened the large oak doors to the living room, huge living room, a huge real Christmas tree with candles on it. My father standing next to it in his finest dark suit with a knight's cross around his neck, singing festive Christmas hymns. So when I came back on Saturday, all hell broke loose. My mother crying, my father yelling, and said, "Look, let's stop that Greek tragedy. I will not appear on these phony celebrations of the birth of Christ when you're wearing this bloodstained cross. You're a murderer. You have no reason to celebrate anything close to Christianity. You're a killer." And he looked at me, "Raus. Get out." Well, there was a little tiny problem. Even though I was in the second to last year of medical school and studied with a scholarship, I needed some pocket money, which I didn't have. And I never asked in the community for money. But Itzhak must have noticed it. Itzhak was my quasi-father. He noticed something. He must have told others, because for the first time at that Saturday, I was approached by a member of the community. His name was Aaron, who never talked to me, and looked at me and said, "Du bist der Goy." "Yes, after 5 years, sure, I'm a Goy." "Dein Name is Bernd, your name is Bernd." "Yes, sure, my name is Bernd. How can I help you, Aaron?" "Well, did you know that your shoes are dirty and your jacket is schmutzig?" And he insulted me that everything is schmutz. "Your shoes are dirty and your jacket is torn." I said, "That's not true." And he gave me 100 mark and said, "Kauf dir neue Sachen, buy new stuff," and left me. I was shocked. I was insulted and being given a lot of money. I walked to Itzhak and said, "Itzhak, Aaron gave me 100 mark because he wanted me to buy new stuff." "Aaron gave you 100 mark? He's stingy. Did you ask him for 200? What's the opportunity?" "No." come on. And I said, well, should I? I said, come on, it's a joke, sit down. One thing you have not yet realized, that we are all human beings, but some of them are Muslims. Muslims mean they're just walking dead. Aaron is one of them. The only thing what I know from him, from the Red Cross, that he was in Auschwitz, but he doesn't talk. He doesn't have no emotions. He's a Muslim man, he's dead. And I think Aaron knew that he was dying, and that I was the ticket to tell everything that he experienced to tell me. And he told me a story which I rarely want to say, but I will tell you tonight. He was a member of a Sonderkommando in Auschwitz. Sonderkommando in Auschwitz was a group of Jews who were selected to bring Jews that were selected to the gas chambers, telling them, when you take off your clothing, I give you a plastic card with a number, and then on the other side, you take the plastic card with a number and we give you back your clothing. It's a shower to clean you. Closing the doors, he SF through the Cyclone B from the top. When the banging ended, it took up to 10 minutes, 15 minutes, Aaron told me. Then he went in with the gas mask of the group, took out the bodies, broke out the drill teeth, anything valuable, burned the bodies, crushed the bones and threw the remnants in the pits next to the crematorium. For that, they were given the chance to live for 90 days, eating finest food, hookers, any kind of sexual pleasures that they want to indulge with. And then 90 days later, they were gassed, the next group came in. Itzhak just made it out, the last group. And he was a dead man inside. But with me, he cried, he showed emotions, and he died. And I got a call from Itzhak when I was in university. Aaron died. We need a Chaver Kadisha, you have to come. I came to Bamberg immediately. Everybody was sitting in the living room, in the Knesset. It was not larger than the living room. And Itzhak told me, look, we need a numbers man for the Chaver Kadisha, we need you. I said, I'm not a Jew, so you're one of us. And we walked to the cemetery, we cleaned the body, prepared it for funeral the next morning. The body was lowered into the grave. And Itzhak gave me a prayer book and said, here, Kaddish, you know it. I said, Itzhak, I'm not a Jew, you're his best friend, you talk now. Say the prayer. And I didn't know the prayer book. I said it, I knew Kaddish. And I crossed the line. I knew that is the day that I crossed the line. And I looked at Itzhak, came back to Itzhak a few days later and said, Itzhak, I want to become a Jew. Itzhak looked at me and said, that's a bad idea. Look, remember what we just get suffering, that you know that we just suffer. Be a righteous person. God said it. You're a wonderful human being. I said, I want to become a Jew. I said, well, I prepared for that moment. I send you to a rabbi in Frankfurt. I pay the trip. I pay the hotel. You don't come back until he cleans your head from these crazy ideas. And I went to travel to Frankfurt. The rabbi told me, look, I know my friend Aaron in Bamberg. I will not issue any blank check for conversion. I teach you though. And every time I met him, of course, I was a nutnik. I told him I want to become a Jew. 2 years later, he had it also. It was in March 1986. And he said, look, Bernd, I sent it to the rabbinical court in Bamberg. They convene in December 1986. Until they get there, you have to do some things that may not be pleasant. One of them involves a little plastic surgery. I don't want to talk about it. It has to be done in a kosher facility in Switzerland. There was a Moel in Munich, but he was a drunk and lightly shaky hand. I wouldn't trust him that. So I went to a certified urologist, physician in Moel in Basel. 3 months later, I had to prepare myself for an immersion in the mikveh, in an Orthodox mikveh in Metz in France, in the Hasidic community. And in December 1986, I presented myself to the rabbinical court in Bamberg, in Trier. And I never forget that. I sat on a chair right in front of a bima of a podium. And on the podium, like in a stage theater, there were 6 rabbis sitting there on the table, looking like judges with a black long coat and a hat. And I told my story. And the chief rabbi shook his head and said, I don't understand. You have all the recommendations here. I know. You know everything. We know. Why does a German son of a Nazi wants to become a Jew? And I had to explain him, and I passed. They came back from a diyun, from a session. I had to stand up, and the chief rabbi read in Hebrew and then in German, certificate of conversion. He said, do you know what that means? Yes. Do you have a name? Why, sure, my name is Bernd Wollschlaeger. Wollschlaeger, that's your old name. Ben Abraham is your new name, by the name, first name. What's your first name? I said, Bernd. You know what it means? Something with bear. You're a bear slayer. You're the doobie. Dov Ben Abraham. It's free. Take it. What do you want to do now? I said, I will go to Israel. Why would you do that? I'm a young doctor, but I don't have the skills there to help anybody. I need to learn still. I have no money to donate for any organization, but I'm willing to fight. And I said, well, good luck. And I passed the background screen by the Jewish agency, by the Israeli embassy, and within a month I got my passport, a stamp according to the law of return. I got a one-way ticket from Frankfurt to Tel Aviv. And the night before, on the 6th of January, I said goodbye to Itzhak, and I said goodbye to my parents. At least I tried. My father didn't let me in the house. He was yelling and screaming. My mother was crying. And I left. I was assigned, I arrived in the nighttime in Tel Aviv, was assigned to a kibbutz, worked during the day, studied in the night. After 6 months, I was assigned to a hospital in downtown Tel Aviv called Ichelov. It's now the Elias Soraski Medical Center. Did 1 year hashlama, meaning to get my German license up to Israeli par. And then immediately was drafted into the military 1 month later because I took an Israeli citizenship without waiting period. Got a basic training, officers training, and then sent in October 1988 to a place called Beit El. No, October 98 was the beginning of the first Intifada, the Arab uprising. Beit El is a base in between Ramallah, the core of the uprising, and the settlements of Beit El. Both sides didn't like us as soldiers. We were in full battle gear. My officer, everybody had loaded weapons. I had my loaded AK, my loaded M16 for officers, a short range M16. I had 2 handguns in my pockets, battled, had everything for battle. And the commanding officer said, look, Chaverot, this is your new doctor. His name is, you have to change your name, doctor. His name, we call him Dr. W. So good luck and don't get killed. And I stood there as a lieutenant, rank a lieutenant on my shoulder, and asked myself, if they find out that I'm a son of a Nazi, i.e. as a Nazi in drag, I would be in deep trouble. I cannot talk about it. I was petrified. And I decided not to talk about my life. And I threw my life in a virtual closet, slammed the door shut, turned the key in the lock and threw the key away, which was a huge mistake. And then many years later, my son asked me this question, Dad, who is my grandfather? Abba mi Saba sheli. And I told him the story. And my son looked at me and said, let me tell my friends. I said, do not tell your friends. He, of course, nice Jewish boy, Orthodox Jewish school, kippah, fill in the morning, Jewish education from elementary school to the end. I'm still paying for it, but it was worth it. And he said, let's do it between you and me. Well, my luck, 3 weeks later, they had a family history day. And I was told, I was not there, but years later, even told that my son raised his right hand and proudly declared, and my great-grandfather was a famous Nazi. Now, needless to say, that's the triggers a call, stat call to the parents, and I got called. And I came to the principal's office. The principal was upset. Dr. Wollschlaeger, your son told us that your father was a Nazi. Is he out of it? I know he has a divorce going on. Maybe you can help. Maybe he's on drugs. No, it's what I told him. It's all true. And the rabbi who joined us at some form, I don't know, during the conversation, looked at me and said, you want to talk about it? I said, no, you have to. Come with me. And he took me to my son's class and I started to talk. And for the first time I talked, something happened that he probably anticipated. The weight was lifted off my shoulders. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question after 20 years, what happened? I need to close the circle of life. I need to move forward in a healthy way for my children's sake and for my sake. And I took my son to Germany in December 2004. We traveled to Germany to visit my parents, which were all gone. I could visit them in the cemetery. And the Bamberg Cemetery is a unique cemetery because the Jews and non-Jews are living or buried in the same plot, just divided by a wall, because Jews and non-Jews lived together for hundreds of years. And when you look for my parents' grave, which is ironically located 1 row parallel to the wall of the Jewish cemetery, you see the Jewish gravestones almost defiantly casting the shadow to the other side at certain days, a certain time of the day still. And I didn't know what to tell him. I was choked up and said, look, Tal, this is your grandparents' gravesite, my parents' gravesite. And the irony is, they're buried in the shadow of history because they never stepped out of the shadow. Shadow will always follow you. But the only thing what I could do is to let the shadow cast upon me, looked back, learned my lessons and stepped out of the shadow to move forward with the determination that this will not happen on my watch ever again. And that's why I'm telling my story, not about it's me, but about the fact that people can change. Even people like my people, as a representative of the German people, I changed. It doesn't mean what my people did is washed away. but I dealt with it, hopefully in a healthy way, to tell others that we can make a difference. And one thing that my father told me that he probably never intended to teach me, is that words of hatred have consequences. Words of hatred, and hatred itself is not this dark matter in the universe that just emerges and we have to succumb to. No, words of hatred are generated by us. And if these words of hatred fall on a fertile ground, the mind of others, they sprout into deeds. And if these deeds prevail, habit will be formed. If these habits prevail, characters will evolve. And if these characters predominate and prevail, then social norms evolve that makes it normal to kill Jews. And that's what happened in Germany. Everybody knew what happened. I mean, I did extensive research in my hometown. Everybody knew what happened, but it was normal to do it. So you could wash your hands with innocence. No, it's not. Nobody intervened, or very few intervened. Very few did something. And so what I did is to bring it back into consciousness and said, look, we are all guilty, but you can do something about it. Everybody can do something about it. Talk about it, do something about it. I made the extreme. I joined stepped to the other side, became an Israeli and joined the army. But when I look back, this is the only thing what I could have done. The only mistake that I deeply regret is I never had the opportunity to say goodbye to my parents and explain it. But that's it, so be it. And if you have any questions, don't forget, everybody has the opportunity to change. Don't judge people by who they are. That if they're Muslims, Christians, or Jews, we need to start to take the cotton out of our mouth, out of our ear, put it in the mouth, and listen what other people have to say, and not call others group, Jew, Muslim, or not. Talk to them as individuals, because don't forget, the first thing that happened to Jews, they were depersonalized, de-individualized. They became a name, Abram and Sarah, not individual names anymore. Then they were depersonalized and said, these are not people, these are not humans, and then demonized, meaning as non-humans, to be killed. So thank you very much, and I know it was a lot, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
So, Dr. Wollschlaeger, I'm Lisa. I'm one of the members of Namat. I thank you so much. I'm wondering, I'll ask some questions here, but can you tell us about some of your books that you've written? Or
well, mostly, if you like medical topics, yeah.
No.
The book A German Life is my major book, which I started. It was a memory. It was something I wrote of my soul for my family. I never wanted to publish it. So it is still being published by Amazon. I wrote it in Hebrew. There's a Hebrew version available, Betzel Ha'av, in the shadow of my father. A Portuguese version, a Brazilian version available by financed by Holocaust survivor. There is a German version available. And of course on Amazon, the English one, A German Life.
We have one question here that says, do you have any siblings? And if so, where are they? And also, why did your father rent an apartment from a woman he thought was a traitor?
Her husband was a traitor.
Her husband was a traitor, yes.
Well, I have siblings. I had two sisters. One sister, 10 years older than I am. She died, and her name was Krista. She died 12 years ago, but she provided me with some essential information about my family before her death, because nobody else would tell me that. And I have a younger sister, Helga. She's 3 years younger than I am. She lives in Germany, and we are again in contact with each other. She has two children. Her children consider me as the cool uncle from Miami. They saw me on German TV a few times. And we have a good relationships. The question about my father renting an apartment. First of all, my father was 1945 in April. It was May. I think it was April. He was captured by American troops when his elite unit tanks, or Tiger tanks, the last formation of Tiger tanks that actually rolled in the war, tried to prevent the American troops to cross the River Rhine after the battle in the Ardennes. And the Americans were not very happy about Germans, because their comrades were brutally massacred against the Geneva Convention, and all anger against Germans. My father was captured alive, and he was thrown in a cage. He was always telling me the story. He was thrown in a cage as a colonel. He was interrogated, beaten, and beaten. And he was then later denazified with all restrictions that there are, meaning couldn't take a job anywhere except a door-to-door salesman. So he was poor. My mother did Desperation approached in 1945 and 1955 in Bamberg, the home of a fellow officer's wife, Nina von Stauffenberg, and begged her if he can rent an apartment. My father never asked for it, and she gave it to him. So it was my mother, not my father. My father grudgingly conceded because there was nowhere to go.
How did your friends or community take your conversion or your path to conversion? Are they supportive or probably mixed?
99.9% thought I never heard a negative word. It just said, I know we all have to deal with it. My friends told me. And actually, I just today communicated by accident with through a school website and said, let me see who's meeting 78 when I finished my college. And it was somebody who asked me that we all knew that you were extreme, but it's a little bit too extreme. I mean, I welcome that you did. I mean, you did something right, but that's a little bit far, isn't it? So that was the worst of the worst that I got. And reactions about it. That's the way you want to live. That's the way you want to live.
Got it. And why did you move from Israel to America?
Why? Because you want to always live in a golden Medina. No, I'm just joking.